in the process of reconciliation are interesting. South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission was a model we studied carefully. Many policymakers made in-depth studies of the still evolving situation in Northern Ireland. For our part, we must rely on the work of our commission, comprised of persons of goodwill, integrity and experience, and a clear vision of the government to ensure a better future for all Sri Lankans. The work of the commission proceeded acknowledging a clear need to heal the wounds of the past and to make recommendations to reconcile the nation by recognizing all victims of conflict, providing redress to them, and thereby promoting national unity, peace and harmony. It is not something that the LLRC overlooked or ignored, but the question of accountability from a perspective of retributive justice is all that seems to occupy the minds of some of our interlocutors in the international community of nations. This appears to be the main thrust of their view in Sri Lanka's reconciliation process. While acknowledging that credible allegations must be looked into, the LLRC found specific information and referred it to the government for action. The government established tribunals within the scope of its military laws and is proceeding with these matters. This is no more or no less than others accused of indiscriminate bombings, killings of civilians, and other violations of human rights and humanitarian law do in the course of their military operations in various parts of the world. Why then is Sri Lanka expected to chart a different course, I ask you? Another reason that the government places reliance on the findings of the LLRC is the methodology that it adopted in its work. In all, the LLRC report was compiled following interviews with over 1,000 persons who gave evidence before the Commission, and over 5,000 written submissions received. To paraphrase relevant portions of the LLRC report, the hearings were held in public and open to the print and electronic media unless the person making representations before the Commission requested otherwise. The procedure adopted at the public hearings was to first inform the person that he or she could be heard in public or in camera. Some elected to make submissions in camera, others elected to make it in public. Thereafter, the commissioners proceeded to interact through questions with the person to clarify any matters that arose consequent to the representations made or which they felt were relevant to the terms of their mandate. The Commission provided every opportunity to persons to make representations in a language of their choice, while providing for simultaneous translation to English. The Commission thus recognized the salutary effect, particularly on affected persons, of being able to relate their stories in a language of their choice. For the purposes of the report, the Commission utilized the English scripts of the simultaneous English translation. The Commission decided to consult and hear the views of persons who would have personal experience and knowledge on different aspects of matters referred to in the warrant. Invitations were also extended to local NGOs as well as NGOs based outside of Sri Lanka that have produced reports on the situation of this country pertaining to matters relevant to the warrant. However, it is a matter of regret that despite invitations extended in good faith, seeking a constructive dialogue on what the Commission considers as issues of common concern falling under the purview of its mandate, this invitation has not been reciprocated by three organizations who seem to be displaying a great interest in the situation in Sri Lanka, and I specify Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and the International Crisis Group. As the public sittings progressed and consequent to the wide media coverage, there was a keen response from members of the public to express their views before the Commission. The Commission facilitated the media to video and audio tape the public proceedings. In addition, the Commission maintained a website since August 2010 where the schedule of Commission visits and transcripts of public hearings public representations and other information regarding the Commission were published. Among those who made representations before the Commission were members of the public, public servants, including those who had served in the affected areas during the conflict period, affected individuals, representatives of the armed forces, senior officials who were associated with the peace process, the humanitarian operation, political leaders, religious leaders, members of civil society, journalists, academics, and other professionals, and former LTT cadres and former members of other armed groups. All these people went before the Commission. The Commission undertook field visits to areas affected by the conflict, as it was of the view that in order to ascertain first-hand ground realities, it was imperative to have public sittings in situ. This was also with a view to reaching out to the people in the affected areas and to enable them to highlight their grievances. These people would otherwise have faced considerable difficulties in traveling to Colombo to make their representations. Through this process, it was able to acknowledge the suffering of the people in the affected areas and provide an opportunity for them to tell their stories in familiar surroundings. This approach focused on the restorative dimension of the Commission's mandate. The warrant of the Commission required it to report on matters that may have taken place during the period between 21st of February 2002 and 19th of May 2009. At the same time, it also recognized that the causes underlying the grievances of different communities had its genesis in the period prior to the time frame referred to in the warrant. The Commission accordingly provided a degree of flexibility to persons making representations in this regard. Let us compare this methodology with that of the report made by the UN Secretary General's Advisory Panel, better known as the Darusman Report. It is also worth noting that the UN Secretary General appointed his panel after the LLRC was appointed by our President. So it was not a reaction to the Secretary General's panel of experts. We were committed right from the start towards moving towards comprehensive reconciliation. The President took this decision to put in place this commission, independent commission. The Secretary General's advisory panel held closed-door hearings with unnamed witnesses who were guaranteed 20 years anonymity to secure their statements. 20 years anonymity. Where have you heard witnesses being given 20 years anonymity? We don't know who these people are. They also received documentation from a variety of sources. This method of gathering information shows that the testimony could not be verified or tested for its probative value. The panel never visited Sri Lanka, even though it was open to them to place the information at their disposal before the properly constituted Commission of Inquiry established under Sri Lankan law. Thus, the process and content of the Darusman report is at best questionable. Several attempts were made to legitimize this personal act of the UN Secretary General to advise himself. We are not challenging the prerogative of the Secretary General of the United Nations to set up a panel to seek advice for himself. That is a different matter altogether. Efforts were made to bring the panel report before the Human Rights Council, though it was procedurally improper. There was an initiative to bring this report, which had not been sanctioned by forums such as the Human Rights Council, to the Human Rights Council through the back door. So obviously we challenged it. However, Vice Council prevailed and Sri Lanka was able to successfully halt these endeavors because it would have set a very bad precedent. When we go before international human rights forums such as the UN Human Rights Council in September for the 21st regular session, it starts on the 10th of September, and in November for the Universal Periodic Review of Sri Lanka, we will share the progress we have made in all aspects of the promotion and protection of human rights. We can do no more than present our case and ask for a fair and impartial hearing. This is no more than we have always demanded. One last aspect that I must mention is that of constitutional and legal reforms to sustain the process of peace building and reconciliation. The peace won at such cost will not be a stable peace until and unless the legitimate aspirations of all communities are met in a substantive and satisfactory manner. I go again to what I said earlier. This is a multicultural, multi-ethnic, multilingual, multi-religious society. So it's not only a selected area that we are looking at the entirety of the country. The consensus formula to the national question thus evolved needs to be democratic, pragmatic, and homegrown in order to be sustainable. As a central figure of the government's approach to evolving such a process, a parliamentary select committee is contemplated to achieve multi-party consensus in respect of constitutional changes to fulfill the legitimate aspirations of the Sri Lankan people, enabling them to work in unison and with a sense of national identity for a better tomorrow. The relevant motion was adopted by Parliament in November last year, unanimously adopted. We are optimistic that the Parliamentary Select Committee process would help achieve such a consensus, given its inclusivity and transparency and commitment to democratic ideals. The government has already nominated its members to the Parliamentary Select Committee and is awaiting the nomination of members representing the opposition, after which its sittings can commence. Whatever decision is taken for constitutional changes, legislative steps, it must stand the test of time. It can't be done with whims and fancy of a select group of people. A meeting of minds is necessary, and flexibility shown on all sides, and a via medium arrived at so that it can be presented, constitutional changes to be effected, which would stand the test of time. Parallel with this multi-party mechanism, the government is committed to bilateral discussions with Tamil political parties as well as Muslim representation. We are mindful that all previous attempts at evolving a constitutional formula have failed due to lack of broad national consensus. Another key to restoration of normality was the holding of elections in the north and east soon after the areas were brought under government control. Provincial council elections were held in the eastern province even before the humanitarian operation ended in the north. And local authority elections were held for the Jaffna Municipal Council and Vavuniya Urban Council as early as August 2009. Presidential and general elections were held island-wide in 2010. Local authority elections held last year saw elections held throughout the country, including in the north and the east. Many former LTT combatants are now in active politics as a result of restoration of normalcy. The LTT's one-time Eastern Province commander is a deputy minister in government. A former LTT child soldier was the chief minister of the Eastern Province, elected by the people. A number of former LTT cadres have also become members of local government bodies. In the areas formerly occupied by the LTT, people exercised their franchise without fear for the first time in 3 decades. The fact that political plurality has returned to these areas is clear from the results of these elections. The swift restoration of democracy to those parts of Sri Lanka is a significant achievement. Elections for the Northern Provincial Council are envisaged to be held in 2013. Another concern is the concerted campaign of disinformation and pressure exerted by the so-called anti-Sri Lanka diaspora. When I talk about the diaspora, I don't mean everyone. There are extreme elements who are part of this definition. This so-called anti-Sri Lankan diaspora in host countries around the world continues to question our record. We call on those countries who express an interest in reconciliation in Sri Lanka to focus on the activities of these groups which are aimed at creating instability and undermining reconciliation. We note that in the recent past, Some progress was made by countries to arrest LTT fundraising to purchase arms and further its campaign of terrorism. We acknowledge that. Similarly, we request these countries to cooperate with the government of Sri Lanka to arrest this campaign of disinformation, which ultimately will have an adverse impact on the peace building and recovery process, if allowed to continue unchecked. We are also taking steps to engage with these groups and wean them away from the defeated LTT agenda of separatism and terrorism. Whenever I go abroad, I always take the opportunity of meeting with the Tamil diaspora groups so that they have an opportunity to bounce off any clarifications that they may require in terms of policy. We have the opportunity of explaining to them the significant advances that are being made towards reaching that goal of comprehensive resolution. So this is being done not only by me, but other key ministers. Whenever they have gone overseas, they have ventured out to do this. I think that's important. It only remains for me to acknowledge with thanks the patronage of His Excellency the President, who in his capacity as Commander-in-Chief and Minister of Defense brought about the conditions under which terrorism could be defeated after nearly 30 years of armed conflict. That defeat paved the way for the Sri Lankan people to move forward as one nation under one banner towards a better future. The leadership of the Secretary to the Ministry of Defense, who is here with us today, supported wholeheartedly by the officers, men and women of the Triforces and the police, also contributed significantly, and without them, this victory would not have been possible. The government fully appreciates the sacrifice and dedication of those in uniform, especially those who sacrifice life and limb for the motherland. In conclusion, I hope that these few days of deliberations, which ends today, which is a continuing exercise on the part of the Sri Lankan Army, the Armed Force Services, and the government to share with our partners the experience and lessons of fighting terrorism, will provide useful. Unfortunately, the reality today is that terrorism has many forms and manifestations that afflict so many of the world's nations. It is only through cooperation, information sharing, and collective action that this scourge could be eliminated. Thank you for your attention.